Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 272. Variety is the spice of world building.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. On book, as always, it's Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And about to go way off book. I am Michael Miller. Can I get us real somber and sad for a couple of minutes? Because I want to share and process something. If you'll allow me, indulge me.
I will indulge you.
So this morning I went to a funeral. I was reading a news story a day ago, and that news story is a 21-year-old woman, I believe in Florida, literally let her 4-month-old son rot to death. He was like in his like cribby thing, or like the way they made it sound in the article, he was in like one of those bouncer seats or something like that, and didn't change his diaper filled with maggots and creepy crawlies. The medical examiners determined that he eventually died of malnutrition and starvation. This child suffered and cried himself to death.
Jesus. And
she is now going to prison, and your and my tax dollars will pay for her, lifetime stay. So she's alive. But my friend Pierce is now dead. So this morning I came from a funeral for my friend Pierce, a kinder person you could not hope to meet. One of the nicest guys you'd ever know. And I don't just say that because he was my friend, because to be perfectly honest, we hadn't hung out a great many times. We probably hung out half a dozen to a dozen times in total. And he was generous with me. He was kind with me. He's always smiling. Just one of those people that you want in your life. Wow. And I thought while at the funeral, how well did I really know Pierce? Because I only hung out with him so many times, but he was good friends with a better friend of mine. So I was like, I should probably go to this funeral. So I'm there and I'm by myself. My other friend showed up. He ended up coming in later than me, so he was seated kind of far away from me. So we didn't sit together. So the whole experience, I was alone. And I'm like, how well did I know him? And then his sister gets up there and talks about him, and she described exactly the man I knew. And it just goes to show you that there are people out there in the world who just put themselves out on Front Street. He was incredibly brave because of his lifestyle choices and what he chose to share and how he chose to be in the world. He was a teacher, so we not only lost a great person, but we lost a great educator. And it just, it shakes my faith a little bit when I think that he is gone, yet this woman down in Florida isn't.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think that's how the world works sometimes. And to tie it into world building, realize that sometimes that's how the world works. There's not a good reason. Sometimes things just happen that way. And also take from this story that there is so little time. Pierce was 24 years old. Wasn't a car accident, wasn't self-inflicted. He literally died in his sleep, and they don't know why. The medical examiner has not finished. We don't know why he is gone.
Wow.
So it's, I hate to start the episode this way, like with a down note, which is why I kind of want to tie it into world building and be like, just remind you that anything can happen. Even the horrible things can happen. So don't sit around waiting, because I had been wanting to get him on this show, or, you know, his life experience and profession were not quite in line with what this show is about. I definitely wanted to sit down and record with him because I found him a fascinating person. And now I'll never get to do that because I waited.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, one of these days I got to call Pierce and we got to sit down and record. Just one of these days. I know he'd be thrilled to do it. I know he'd be happy to sit down with me. You know, he's always such a great guy. And I can't do that now. So don't have that regret. And I don't mean just with like people in your life, but also the things you're working on, the fictions you're working on, the projects you're working on. If they really mean something to you, don't wait.
Mm-hmm.
So
do what you can now. Yeah.
So I thank you guys for taking a moment to listen. And Jeff, I appreciate you indulging me and letting me.
Hey, no problem. I mean, there's nothing I can really say about that stuff. You know, I mean, it's horrible what happened to your friend, you know, and I mean, you know, as a relatively new parent, I just couldn't imagine, you know, not being able to not respond when your kid is losing it like that. So, I mean, I will never understand this lady in Florida. Good God.
Yeah, completely separate. To be very clear, those are completely separate incidents.
Yeah,
I was just using one as a comparison against the other.
To bring up the why does this person get to survive quandary that, you know, will haunt, unfortunately, each of us, you know, probably several times in our life. You know, you'll get a pairing of events that just seems unfair.
Seem right.
Yeah. And the loss of someone, especially someone young, is always tragic, or at least it's always more painful. You know, I mean, even, you know, I mean, at a much less loss of a way, I remember we lost we had 4 cats. We lost the youngest. And it shocked us because he was just getting into his prime. And he got a bug and it killed him, and it just blew our minds. So obviously I've known people too. And people, obviously, for me, are always a bigger loss, no matter how well you love your pets. But you know, the thing is, life comes at you in strange ways, which is one of the reasons why we say always try and move forward. You know, you can't always necessarily get exactly where you want to be right away, but what's that next step you can take? You know, just work towards that next step, and you'll always be making progress. And trust, because life is full of setbacks. Hopefully you think I'm crazy, and will always think I'm crazy as the listener.
I know you're crazy.
Well, I mean, in what I'm saying at this moment, not just, yeah. Okay. So getting into the 4 S's. This is something I thought of. You know, we've done a couple related to a story Michael and I are working on, and I wanted to go back a little bit more to something strictly beneficial to the act of creation, where the other ones I try to abstract it to where it could be beneficial to other people and just provide general entertainment. But this one is more meant, you know, to help people. You know, when I say encounters, you know, I was specifically thinking of random encounters for the game I'm working on with Michael. And the thing I noticed is a lot of people online are always like, you know, they either offer up random encounters, which is what they're called in gaming, and storytelling. If you're writing a book, it's those scenes that they don't directly push the story forward, but you have them to help flesh out your story. And I was kind of shocked going around to see what other people are doing online. A lot of it, you know, is strictly tables of monsters. You know, you've met 4 monsters of this type with these hit points, and this is what they're currently doing. And to me, obviously in gaming, that's a style of random encounter. But to me, this is an extremely boring style of random encounter. And fighting's always important, but there's more to storytelling than just delivering props for people to knock down. I mean, there's probably a period of gaming in middle school and early into high school where that's maybe not completely true. But even back then, if you go back to your mind, the reason you start, you know, making your games a little bit more story intensive is because if all you're doing is essentially killing things, you could be playing a video game. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you game that way, I'm not critiquing you, but I want people to be better storytellers. And so I thought this was very important. So I came up with 4 S's, 4 things to make encounters better. And the first one is spice. Why? Because I was stretching to find an S word here. But the idea is when you cook, you use spice to add additional flavors and to pull out existing flavors of the food you're eating. And the thing is, if I'm eating a nice big steak, I don't throw steak on for spice because that's just more steak. And it doesn't really help improve.
I wouldn't hold it against you if you wanted to steak top steak. I'd be fine with steak top steak.
That should be a restaurant chain. Double steak.
Steak top steak.
But the idea is, they usually use butter, salt, and pepper at a minimum on steak to help add more flavor and to pull out the wonderful flavor that exists within it. Or you can add in other spices. But the thing is, if the main crux of your story, let's say, is action adventure, right? It is mainly going around fighting and overcoming foes through the use of physical force. Use encounters as a way to step back away from that. Possibly a character building exercise where, it's the infamous shopping trip where you meet that weird NPC merchant in the stalls of the thing, which players love, but people who aren't engaged in it maybe don't find it quite so exciting. But they're great ways to, in a non-combat way, allow characters to interact in a verbal level. And it doesn't just have to be a merchant scene, but just look, if the main crux of your story is fighting, don't make all of your random encounters fighting, or at least they should obviously not require fighting. That's not to say if the players have agency, if there are players and they have agency, they should be able to. But the primary purpose, or they don't have to get in a fight every time they have a random encounter. It's not going to push the plot forward. Yeah, they'll get a little bit of XP, and they maybe just do it because they want to, and they're escaping because of the things in their life, and they're taking it out on possibly this NPC. But the thing is, add different types of scenes. If you're mainly building up tension, and I know we've talked about this a little bit in storytelling before, like if you're building up tension a lot, after a while, if you keep building up tension, it loses its usefulness. People's tension will peak out. So you need a scene to break the tension just a little bit. So when you start raising the tension back up, it can go and they can become more tense than they were before. Same thing with horror. If you're working up someone and scaring them, if you can pull it back occasionally, it allows it to become even scarier. That's the reason why in most 80s horror slasher films, you always had a comedic character who didn't die right away. Probably died, but did not die right away because it helped increase the horror tension that was building in the story. So you need to add a variety of different types of scenes that aren't common in the main story that you're either writing in the book or that the characters are interacting with in your story. So spice is number 1. Spice will make your entire story better. And another one we talked about a little bit, number 2, is surprises. And I mainly mean Easter eggs by saying that. That's your shout out. I don't know how many Monty Python Easter eggs exist in our episodes. And usually we're pretty obvious about them, but sometimes I like to do them subtly. Right.
Very subtle.
Very subtle. But I think, and this is part of this is knowing your audience, but it's the shout out to the, if you're writing fantasy is, out of the corner of the eye, seeing the Legolas style character going past and everyone can go, oh, okay. Tolkien is involved here somehow, it's a little shout out. Now, obviously, if you're selling your content, you can't, you have to be careful with copyright. I don't know all the rules on that, so I'd be careful doing that. Like if I was releasing a novel, but especially in games, you can get away with it. But I see that a lot in video games and television shows where they'll do a shout out to something. that really isn't even world cool.
I actually, I had a GM who I thought was absolutely, and he was a very good GM, but I thought he was an absolutely amazing world builder. When we were in high school, he was one of the first GMs that I used to play with. And it wasn't until a few years later that I realized that his entire world was ripped from Liam Gibson. Like characters, locations, and all. And I was like, oh, I see. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery here. Like, he didn't create all this stuff. All he did was describe what he read in the book. And that was our cyberpunk, campaign. And it was fantastic, but it wasn't.
Well, I guess if you're going to do a cyberpunk campaign, ripping off Gibson is not a bad choice.
Yes, rip it off the best. But the point is that it wasn't original. I mean, and that's fine. And
usually when you start, that's kind of how it rolls.
Yeah, and like you're saying, put Legolas in the story. By all means, I mean, if you're doing a tabletop game, I got no problems with fan service as long as your audience understands what's going on.
Or it's like, I have a funny one in Gardul. There's a hill, actually, it's in, I think, the second book I wrote called Thor's Hill. And most people would think that is actually an Easter egg of, Thor from either the Marvel universe. Or
I know exactly what this is.
But this is actually a reference to the cat I was just talking about.
It's one of your cats, yeah.
And there's actually a mythology about a character called Thor in my world. And there's a hunting ground, which is a nebula that you could somehow see at night really well, because it's really way too close. You probably wouldn't see it if it was really there, but you can in my world. So it's actually an Easter egg towards my cat. So it brought me some catharsis, which hopefully means what I think it means.
I do believe that is appropriate usage.
Use strengthening stories. So this is number 3, strengthening. And so the idea is sometimes, depending, especially if you're doing interactive tabletop, this works really well. Or sometimes when I write a scene out, I go, I want to know more about this. Let me go deeper than I was planning. So I have this one-off scene with a character, and let's say the character works out really well. And now I'm interested in this character. Sometimes ends up becoming written in. Let's say there's literally a character that ends up throughout my trilogy that is meant to be one character involved in one scene in the first book. And he's supposed to essentially, he's a red herring character. Really obvious. I think it would be caught by most people who are reading the story the first time that this character is a red herring. But I found it interesting, and I wanted to follow this character going back home after the event. So I Michael'd the character. I literally tortured him for 3 novels with hopefully a bit of a release at the end.
I like that my name has become a verb.
I verbed you.
You verbed me.
I've Michaeled him.
I had a really funny moment. I was at work, and I was reading this list of like the top 30 or 35 dumbest things ever posted on the internet, and me and my coworkers were reading them and just laughing our butts off at how dumb people are. And some person's like, write a verb that describes me. And then a bunch of people are writing adjectives, because adjectives are what describe people. And they're putting all these up, and me and my coworkers are laughing so hard, and I look at my coworker and I'm like, verb? I believe adjective is the noun you're looking for. We both just laughed and laughed, because adjective is not an adjective. Adjective is a noun, and adjective is the noun you're looking for.
That's what I love sometime. But the idea is either have some planned that actually start a side plot, or if one goes over really well at your table, or you really feel intrigued with an aspect when you're writing a story, take advantage of that and turn it into a side plot. That's why I call it a strengthening encounter. So it actually strengthens the whole story by adding another layer to it. And sometimes you might go back and go, you know what? This is neat, but it doesn't really add anything to the work, and maybe and you have to cut it back out. But if nothing else, it will, as a writer, it will help satiate you, and players a lot of times, when you're gaming, fall in love with things that to you were just a one-off thing that you were just chucking in there because you needed something like that right now. I need that. Let me go through my list. and figure out what I want to do. Let's just check this out. And you throw out Halb and friends. They encounter them, but then they fall in love with Halb, and Halb becomes an NPC. And then finally, setbacks. And that's one of the biggest things that I think people don't use enough in fiction. All good fiction does this, even if it's unintentional. But sometimes it might not have anything to do with the story. You might have them planning the story. All your encounters don't have to make the party a little bit stronger or a little bit better. Or maybe it does, but in a roundabout way. They have to step back to move around, or they have to make a change because of this random encounter that happens. You know, if you're doing a story with first level characters in Dungeons and Dragons, and you throw out a dragon, that should be a setback to the party. If not, you're not doing dragons correct. There's no way they could beat the dragon, even if they had the proper equipment, which they shouldn't. But
certainly not first level characters.
But certainly not first level characters with the equipment should be dragon bait. You know, so, and it doesn't have to be like that extreme, because that would obviously just kill off the party if they tried to fight it. But, you know, give them stuff to intentionally cause them a setback or make them really work hard. Because sometimes they'll surprise you too. Sometimes when you think you're creating setbacks, you're not. It reminds me, I was playing this game, an old MMO called Horizons. And it was a very fun game, and they had these really huge world events. And so they had it was the first game that had a huge crafting side to where people could play the MMO strictly as crafters. Because you'd have a crafting class and a character class, and you could strictly level and gain hit points and do all that stuff through crafting. And some people would do that because they'd have big like bridges you have to build. And so what they thought they would do is you'd be forced to use crafting to build a bridge to an island. And once that bridge was built, then it would open up the first DLC, you know. And I remember this was literally one of the issues they had in there. It was meant to be a setback because the bad guy in Horizons was called the Blight. And so the game masters had pretty good control. And so like when you were in an area they didn't want you to be, the Blight would just start coming and coming and coming at you. And kind of like think of like World War Z happening to you. And so you'd have to work together with combat classes and crafting classes. We have to work together to get through these major world construction events. And it would take like massive raids to protect essentially raids of crafters. It was a lot of fun. But the thing was, the first one that they built was meant to lead to their first DLC, got completed in like 6 months. And they were expecting it would take at a minimum a year for the players to complete. So then all of a sudden, a whole new part of the world opened up that was empty because they just did not have the time to create it.
I'll see, that cracks me up when the developers, like, inevitably it happens in Destiny every time they drop new content. Like they'll be like, oh, it's going to take X amount of time for, you know, the first team to get this done. And inevitably they get it done infinitely faster. You know, they're like, it's going to take 3 weeks. It's done in 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's like I remember reading. I did not play Fallout 76, and I don't want to go too much into it because that's a whole episode into itself, the drama of Fallout 76. But the thing that happened, I found a more amusing thing, which would tweet me out if I actually was the developer, was their in-game content was you would like launch nukes. And it would bring up like rare monsters and rare crafting items, and then it would fade. The half-life of these nukes were really, really short, though, I guess. So like, but in the time that they were active, like the area would have special monsters and special. It was really how you created the in-game content. And I believe the first nuke was launched day 1.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Whoopsie.
Yeah, that's pretty much if you're doing like an MMO or these games, these looter shooters, which are sort of like light MMOs, I guess. Then essentially your in-game content's typically planned for a year at the minimum. I would imagine. But you know, hey, that's the fun thing of those kind of games when you play them. That's not a major critique. So once again, the four things make anyone's encounters better: spice, surprises, strengthening, and setbacks.
I got a few more things to say about setbacks.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, something about like story setbacks. Like I've seen it in a lot of good TV shows. I've seen it in movies where my wife. I'm gonna segue in a segue, or rather, I'm gonna tangent in a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
My wife has a poor relationship with movies. She loves and hates movies at the same time. We'll watch a movie and she'll enjoy the whole movie, but then hate the movie because she didn't appreciate the ending.
Okay. Yep.
For her, she always wants a happy conclusion. She wants to see the guy get the girl. She wants to see the good guys win. She wants to see everybody live. And that nowadays,
a lot of people are like that. Yeah.
Well, but the thing is, that's rare these days. So we were watching a movie just recently where the entire movie was fantastic. Really high tension, very, very tense movie. It was really good. And a character died that she didn't want to die. The movie ended in a fashion that she didn't like. She was like, oh, they were supposed to succeed and win and live, and they didn't. And I'm just like, you loved being in that entire adventure. You just didn't like the conclusion. Why can't you like the whole thing? Because you liked almost everything about it. But because
Davina says it was good storytelling because it had an impact on her. Just not what she was expecting.
Well, but the point is that this has occurred tons of times where for her, she places a lot of value on that conclusion. So there's this, variety, this twist that happens. For me, I'm okay with that. When Kevin Smith wrote Red State, and that's a movie that I defy anybody to watch that's never seen it before and predict what's going to happen. Because that movie goes in all directions. He wrote it in a fashion where as soon as he was able to predict what he thought the next event was going to occur in the movie, he said, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to zig instead of zag. So for the whole process, it was an exercise in spontaneous creation when he wrote that script. So he's like, well, okay, I just don't want anyone to know what's going to happen next. And that movie goes that way. You're watching it and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Like, it's very unpredictable. And I'm good with that. Like, there's a lot of great TV shows where you're like, oh, everything's finally come together. This person's finally met up with that person. They're going to go kick the crap out of the bad guy. They have the information they need. It's all on the up and up. And then things go drastically wrong and they take a turn that you weren't seeing. And that's the setback. You're like, oh my God, they worked so hard to get there. And they were the underdog. So of course we're all rooting for the underdog. And then something happened that set them back so much further. Like, characters got killed and all their plans were thwarted and the upper hand that they had in the scenario didn't matter at all. And you're like, what the hell? But now all you want to do is watch the next episode. No, so it did exactly what it was intended to do. It upped the ante of the story. It roped you in even deeper.
The one I was actually thinking of when I was putting that one down was there's a style of martial arts movie, and I've never seen a high budget version that does this, but I like to call them the puzzle bosses. And
puzzle bosses.
So essentially,
this sounds very much like Kung Fu Theater.
There were several of these on Kung Fu Theater.
Okay.
It's like I've only seen them at that level of quality. So I don't know if there's ever been an expensive version made with one of these. But the idea
this sounds so familiar. And I literally have a movie in my mind. I don't remember the title, but go ahead.
Essentially, it's not good enough to be really powerful in martial arts to beat them. Because inevitably what will happen is, a group of heroes will come together to defeat the foe. And then the first time they face him and they're on the verge of beating him, they realize that they cannot, and then he beats them. And it happens in, I think, every one of these movies. So this one's very predictable that you know it's going to come. But it's like, and then they through more training and like maybe another guru or two, they learn that they have to like do a certain sequence of actions that each person has to do one thing at a specific time. to be able to actually damage him, to either turn off the invulnerability or, which is usually what, in the even cheesier versions is what happens, or other times it's just like you can't completely defeat them unless you do like these 6 sequences of actions at once. And then the biggest hero will finish them off once you get through the sequence.
There's two Kung Fu theater specials that come to mind on this. There's one where the guy he keeps learning all all these badass different forms of Kung Fu because he wants to beat this master, and he just can't beat him. And the guy he's trying to beat is this old school, long-haired, long-bearded master, and he's a young guy. And every time he tries to attack him, he attacks with such force, with such power. He extends his arm in a slow-motion punch, and the old wizened master is able to ride the currents of air that the force of that punch creates, and he floats backwards, and he's able to avoid the punch because he's like, your force pushes me away from the strike. So he does this over and over again, and he's like, I need to learn a better version of Kung Fu, and he gets his butt kicked every time. He cannot fight this guy. And there is a woman who teaches him Kung Fu. She's like, you need to learn this form of Kung Fu. And he's like, I can't learn that. That's woman's Kung Fu. I can't, it's very chauvinistic, masculine versus feminine thing that they're doing. And she's like, come here. And she makes a paper doll, a full-size, man-sized paper doll that looks like this master he's trying to strike. She's like, try to strike him. And he goes to punch. And the paper doll whooshes backwards because it's so light that he forces it backwards. And he's like, I can't hit it. He keeps trying to strike it really hard, and he can't hit it. And then she does, this woman Kung Fu, and it allows her to get very close and go, boop, boop, and she totally tears it apart. And he's like, how'd you do that? So she teaches him this womanly Kung Fu, and then she goes to fight the guy, and it's a tongue-in-cheek, combat sequence where the master's like, how are you able to strike me? And he's like doing these very dainty womanly moves, and that's the whole thing.
Actually, I've seen this movie, yes.
Yes, and there's the other one that comes to mind is there's this one where
I believe it's actually a Jet Li movie, an early Jet Li movie.
Is it?
I believe it is. I'm not 100% positive.
I'd have to look that up. I don't know. And there's another one where the guy cannot find this old school master's weak spot. Like he attacks the heck out of the guy and can't find the guy's weak spot. And he's one of these his look is that he's got the like almost completely shaven head, but the super, super, super long ponytail. And the ponytail is loaded with needles. So while he's attacking the master, he attacks, and then he quickly pulls out a needle, and he strikes, and he sticks the needle into different nerves. What he's trying to find is like everyone's got a singular nerve that will kill them or make them weak or whatever it is. And he goes crazy with Kung Fu, and he puts so many needles into the guy, he looks like a porcupine. And I do wish I could find this because I'd be interested in seeing the special effect. I remember as a child, I say child, but probably young man, watching this and being impressed by the special effects because the guy literally he was covered in like acupuncture needles. And in one motion, he like kind of like flexes and all the needles eject from his body. And he's
that was one of the invulnerable bosses, I'm assuming.
Well, right. He's like, I just put needles all over this guy. How on earth did none of them hit his vital nerve, whatever it is? And then like at the end of the movie, he like does it again, but the only place that he neglected to stick a needle was in the palm of his hand. His fists were closed. They were fighting. He never struck him in the palm. And that's where he struck him. And he's like, the vital nerve, and I guess the eyes bleeding from the eyes. And
exploded or something.
Yeah, exactly. And he finally dies. But yeah. Oh my gosh, I love Kung Fu theater. I love like USA Up All Night and USA Kung Fu Theater and on Sunday afternoons.
I love both of those. My favorite of all time was Monster Vision. I have to say Monster Vision. Little shout out to Godzilla Up North, Mr. Dave, because we used to go over to his house and watch Spawn, the animated series, and then right after that, we'd watch Monster Vision, or vice versa. I forget the order. Yeah,
for me, it was like Gilbert Gottfried, USA Up All Night, and Ron DeShear, USA Up All Night, like Surf Nazis Must Die, and Toxic Avenger, and then on Sunday afternoon it would be Kung Fu.
That was
Theater.
Gilbert Gottfried that did that?
He did it. There was another guy who had this like country western thing going that did it, but it was them. It was Rhonda Shear, that country western guy, and Gilbert Gottfried. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Big
I wonder if the country western guy was Joe Bob Briggs from Monster Vision.
That is exactly who it was.
Okay.
That is exactly.
Yeah, I love Joe Bob Briggs.
I couldn't remember the name, but yes, it was Joe Bob Briggs.
Okay. So yeah, that must have been his other gig that he did. It was probably the exact same thing. Okay. So, but now I do have one more. It's a bonus one, and this is for all the game masters out there, because don't randomize, semi-randomize your encounters. It's either good, in a location, but not necessarily everywhere, or even with that, have some encounters that something else would have had to happen first. Repercussion encounters. So, say you catch, the thief, now there's another encounter, thief's gang comes to beat you up, becomes opened. So have like encounters that can only happen if other encounters happen. And then also say, you know what, it doesn't make sense to have these water elementals attack you in the lava pit. So.
Well, I mean, how powerful are these water elementals?
Well, incredibly, the steam elementals. I'm sure they would.
They become steam elementals.
But it's like, you use some logic when you put these together for yourselves. And usually, and I haven't really played a module in years. Modules would usually have random encounters for sections. And so think of it kind of like that. It's like, and typically, I'll have an Excel sheet. And you can even create a master one, which is like all of the scenes, all of the ideas you ever have in one spot. So later on, if you're struggling for a scene, you can kind of go through it for ideas, or, for a specific adventure, you can start building one out for that adventure to say, okay. And then if stats are important for fighting, you can include those in there as well too. I just like to have one spot where I can kind of go through, whether it's my own random chart or if it's just a list of possible scenes that I can take from and utilize to fill out a story with different characters. So there's a different sequence, a different outcome. But always good to be able to have a big library to go back into later on. And because really you'll find storytelling is the art of saying the same thing over and over again and having people not realize that you're doing that, inevitably, like if you watch like a TV series long enough, you'll figure out its formula. And then about the fifth time you watch through it all, you start to realize that, okay, this is a happy episode, which means the next episode will be really bad. So you'll actually learn this stuff watching TV series, especially a more modern TV series where there's story arcs that happen throughout. But really, that is the 4 S's. Once again, is spice, surprises, strengthening, setbacks, and then for game masters, semi-random encounters. And
you raise something funny that. Like random aside or semi-random. Semi-random aside encounter. I want to start introducing my nephews to tabletop role playing. I was actually going to ask you if you wanted to do like something with them, but I was like, I can handle a 12 and a 14-year-old. So I think I'm going to do it. I'm not a great game master, but I figure with as young as they are, I think I'll be just fine. We'll mostly be combat centric. So
yeah. Target pop up, target falls down.
Well, I don't plan on going that rudimentary. I still want to give them a story. Yeah. But I tried to GM something when I was in my 20s, and I look back on it and I was like, ugh, it was terrible. So I want to do good by them and good by the craft, especially since I have a show that is very GM-centric.
Well, if you don't get it from us, you can always go talk to Derek. He'll give you some good advice.
That's true. That's
the
true.
GM podcast.
Yeah, if you guys don't listen to Seize the GM, check them out as well. If you like this show, you'll probably like that one.
Yes. Yeah, even if you don't game master, if you like fantasy stories, lots of good ideas, games, it's all intertwined when you get into the geek side of things. So Now, for the world building task of the day, start tracking your encounters. When you come up with these little story things, sometimes they're going to be off the hip. Just write them down, and later on, you have something to pull back and reuse again. If you need something, you can start creating that list that you can go back to. Or if you're a writer, write down just the abstract, how many characters were involved, that weren't part of the who were, outside of the protagonist, and then later on you can adopt and reuse scenes in writing as well too. So, but start tracking your encounters, your scenes, and because it just builds up a library for you. And the more scenes that you get stuck in your head, that you can abstractly then apply to something else, the more quickly you could tell stories in the future. So, and if nothing else, a lot of times you have to refer to it because something will just pop into your head. That's the beautiful thing about it. And then for the real world task of the day, this is Michael reminded me that why I actually started doing this was not just to try and get people to join the Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/Undercroft. Oh, excuse me. But, it was actually to get an actual real world task of the day occasionally. And for this one is bank some goodwill. Don't say you're banking goodwill. Don't say, hey, spouse, I'm doing this because I want goodwill for later, but do something spontaneous out of the ordinary that's helpful around your house. And my example here is like, maybe it's the garage. There's something that needs to be spring clean as we approach spring here in our hemisphere, or fall cleaned if you're in the opposite hemisphere. Find something that just needs a little extra elbow grease put into it. Knock it out.
I'm going to say, karmically speaking, it doesn't have to be in your household.
No, it could be in your garage, in the yard. It could be at your neighbor's house.
It could be out there in the world for anyone. No. It doesn't have to turn around. And I'm saying more like, karmically speaking, pay it forward sort of way.
No, absolutely not. This is
thinking about
selfishly.
Thinking about my friend Pierce, who was one of the kindest, most generous people I've ever met. Like, give you a quick example. We had to work on this game. I knew him from playing Airsoft, and I was creating a game that very quickly got way bigger than I was expecting it to be, and I needed bodies. Like, I literally needed labor. I needed help, and he was one of the people, and I didn't know him well at the time. And I was like, hey, could you help me run this game? Now, this would be something that a person should be paid for. And I was like, I can't pay you. And he's like, that's fine. He's like, I'll help. Like, he was so generous and so kind and understanding about it. And that's the type of thing. And I'm not saying you have to give away all of your free time, but every now and then, that's one of those things that can either make the difference in someone else's life or be the catalyst for a big friendship.
Yeah, because when you're that person too, especially the people that know you, if they see these kind of actions coming from you, are less likely to push back when you need something. Oh, I need some time in November to write. I need to get this creative thing done. Can I get a couple hours here or there so I can do it? The more you do these kind of things, and the people who know you know that you do these kind of things, the more the easier it is for them to go, oh yeah, no problem. And it might not always work out. So that's life. Life isn't always fair. But the thing is, you're at least taking the steps and being proactive to set up the situation, whether it's directly or indirectly. So everyone, have a good week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.